Good afternoon, everybody. I've got a fair amount of work to do on this Kubota over the next few days, but I can't comfortably get underneath it without lifting it, so I need to make some ramps. I could go out and buy a cheap set of ramps, but they're all made of plastic, and even though this Kubota doesn't weigh very much, I just don't feel comfortable getting under any vehicle that's only held up by plastic. So I'm going to make my own ramps. These ramps will be made of solid wood, and I'll be able to put just about any vehicle I want on top of them without having to worry about them deforming or breaking. And best of all, these ramps are cheap and they're easy to make. So let's do it. The main thing that we're going to need to complete this build is two 10-foot 2x10s. Each 2x10 will be cut into 5 pieces, with each piece 5 inches shorter than the last. I'll put up the lengths of the resulting segments on the screen. Also, in a few minutes, I'll go over exactly how I got these numbers and how you can modify them a bit to make ramps of different dimensions to suit your own needs. Lastly, I'm going to be using this miter saw to make these cuts, but you could just as well use a circular saw or even a handsaw. It's just that a miter saw is the quickest and easiest tool to use, and since I have one, I'm going to use it. One other thing I should mention, a 2x10 is about 250 millimeters wide. I use metric because the width of most car tires is written on the sidewall in millimeters. 250 millimeters is wider than most vehicle tires, certainly wider than most tires on passenger cars and many light trucks as well. But if you have a vehicle with wider tires, say a 265 or larger, you may want to go up to a 2x12 just to give yourself a bit more breathing room. But for me working on this little Kubota, a 2x10 is just fine. Since I brought it up, I figured it might be helpful to briefly talk about how to read the numbers in the sidewall of a tire. This is a picture of the tire on my grandfather's 2002 Mercury Grand Marquis. It's only appropriate to drive this car if you're 65 or older, so I really don't drive it much, but there's nothing wrong with using this picture of the sidewall for demonstration purposes. You can see here that the sidewall has 3 numbers on it. They're always formatted as follows: first number, slash, second number, R, third number. Here's what these numbers mean. The first number is the width of the tire in millimeters. So in this case, the Grand Marquis has a 225 millimeter wide tire. The second number is the aspect ratio. This is the ratio expressed as a percent of the height of the sidewall divided by the width of the tire. So in this case, the Grand Marquis sidewall is 60% as high as the tire is wide. If you do the math, this works out to a sidewall height of 135 millimeters. The R indicates that the tire is of radial construction, which pretty much all tires in passenger cars and light trucks are. And finally, the third number is the diameter of the rim. So the Grand Marquis has a 16-inch rim. Note that the diameter is measured in inches, not in millimeters. So let's go over this one more time. The Grand Marquis has a 225 millimeter wide tire, whose sidewall is 60% as high as the tire is wide, of radial construction, which fits a 16-inch rim. I'll use this scale drawing of the ramp to briefly explain how I calculated where to make the cuts in the 2x10. First, I decided that the ramp will be 5 levels high. This gives me a total lift height of 7.5 inches. Remember, a 2x10, despite the name, is only 1.5 inches thick. After deciding how many levels I wanted, I then decided that each step will be 5 inches wide. Once I had this parameter, I defined the bottom board as being of length L. This made the second board L-5, the third L-10, then L-15, and L-20. Knowing that the total length of the board is 120 inches, I then took the sum of all of the levels and set it equal to 120. Solving for L, I got 34 inches. You can modify this design in whatever way you want. For example, you can take away the top level. With only 4 levels, you'll have less total lift height, but each level will be a bit wider. Similarly, you could make each step a bit narrower. This will make the ramp steeper, but at the top you'll have a wider platform. It really just depends on your circumstances, what vehicle you're working with, what tire size you have, and how high you want to lift the vehicle. All right, I've marked off where all my cuts need to be, so let's get it done. This next step is optional, but it is helpful. I'm going to put a 45-degree miter on the end of each board, just to make it a bit easier to drive on and off the ramp. Now we can screw everything together. One screw into each side will be just fine. All right, I just built the second identical ramp off camera, so now it's time to test them. I'd say that looks pretty good for $35 in an hour worth of work. Anyways, that does it for this build. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe.